All right, welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana. And so with this coffee, it is a small lot coffee, and we're going to learn a little bit about culture, history, and dedication to coffee and what goes into making these kinds of bags of coffee for us. So with small lot coffees, they come from smaller regions of the world, so they're going to have a very distinct flavor that comes from that region. So we're going to have a very distinct flavor for this cup of coffee. And so with this cup of coffee, we are getting notes of orange blossom, milk chocolate, and a caramely sweetness. And then for those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. And then those of you returning, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to the channel, we like to brew our coffee 3 different ways. That way we get to explore the different flavor notes that we get from all different brewing methods. Because each different brewing method is going to give out the different amount of oils and sediment, impacting the flavor in a different way. And so that's important because we want to be able to explore all the coffees in all the different ways that it has available so that we know what brew method we like preferred to that region of coffee. So different regions have different flavors to offer, and we can extract those different flavors differently depending on the brew method that we choose. So with an African coffee, we tend to get a little bit more of those citric flavors, and we can help bring out those citrus flavors by doing like a pour over coffee. But if you do like a Latin American coffee where you get a little bit more of those milk chocolate flavors, or say like a Southeast Asian coffee where you get a little bit more of those earthy roasty flavors, doing like a French press is going to help bring out some more of those dark bitter flavors. So depending on the brew method that you choose is going to impact the flavors of your coffee. So making sure that we properly brew our coffee and just choosing all the different brew methods is very important just so that we can properly explore the coffee and get to learn about the flavor notes that are available for that blend. And then also when you're brewing coffee, you want to make sure that you're getting your proportion right. And so with coffee, you have a proportion of water to grinds, and then also making sure that you're getting your grind on the right setting per the brew. So when we have a pour over right here, we have a slightly finer grind, and then it's pretty much a medium grind. And then we have a medium coarse grind for the Chemex. And then with the French press, we're getting the coarsest grind or the French press setting. So each of them have a different setting for grinds and a different amount of grinds, and then also a different amount of serving water. So for the pour over that I'm prepping right here, we just have a 16-ounce cup of coffee. So we're doing 30 grams of coffee. And then for the Chemex, it's going to be about around 20 ounces of coffee. And that is going to be 45 grams of grinds. And then with the French press, we have an 8-cup going. So that's going to be about roughly 3 grande cups of coffee, maybe 2.5. But we have 56 grams, sorry, 56 grams of grinds in our French press for this cup of coffee. So even though these ones have more grinds in the brew process, there is more water, so a larger serving per process. So you're only consuming more caffeine if you actually drink the entire French press versus a 16-ounce cup of coffee. You are going to have a much different flavor profile. With the Chemex, we're going to get a lot more of those sediments and a lot more of the oils, so we're going to get a much bolder, robust, flavorful cup of coffee. And so when you're brewing any kind of paper filter or Chemex, you want to make sure that you let your coffee bloom when you pour the water. So letting your coffee bloom, what that means is you're pouring a little bit of the water on top of the grinds, and you're letting the air that's trapped in between each of the individual grinds to rise to the surface. And so if you don't allow that that air to rise to the surface of the grinds, it actually gets pushed down towards the bottom of the filter, and it creates a barrier, an air barrier that slows down the brew process, and that's going to impact your flavor of your coffee in a negative way. So making sure that we let our coffee bloom is very important to making sure that we get the proper flavor out of our coffee. So with this cup of coffee, or this blend of coffee, we are going to get orange blossom, milk chocolate, and a caramely sweetness. So in the pour over, we're going to get a lot more of those orange blossom notes. And then with the Chemex and the French press, we're going to get more of that milk chocolate, caramely sweetness flavor. And then with the Chemex, we're going to get a little bit more of that sweet flavor. And the French press, we're going to get more of those bold bitters. So we're going to get more of that milk chocolate. So I'm actually really looking forward to the French press on this particular cup of coffee, just because when I drink a cup of coffee, I tend to lean more towards like the Latin American coffees. I look for a milk chocolate, caramely sweetness cup of coffee. And so that's why I'm a little bit excited about this cup, just because it pretty much meets my criteria for the flavors of coffee that I'm looking for. And then also with the orange blossom notes, the orange blossom notes aren't going to be as predominant as you would get in like a regular bright citrusy flavor profile. The orange blossom is going to be a little bit more subtle than a regular like actual true orange notes. So we're going to go ahead and try the pour over first while we wait for the Chemex to finish up. And so for the pour over, you know that you brewed a good pour over. It takes around 2.5 minutes for a grande. And then it's going to take around 3.5 to 4 minutes for a Chemex. And then for the French press, we're going to do a 4-minute brew time. Very interesting. So with the pour over, we're getting that very intense, bright citrus aroma. So we're getting that orange blossom. And what it also has is that strong floral flavor. So that's where that blossom comes in. So we're getting that strong, bright, citrusy, floral flavors at the very beginning. And then as the palate starts to wash away, we start to get a little bit of that milk chocolate caramely sweetness. But because of that floral aroma is so intense, we're left with that dry mouth feeling that kind of leaves that lingering floral flavor. So we have a very floral forward coffee on the pour over. And getting a whole lot of that orange blossom flavor. Alright, so let's taste the Chemex. So with the Chemex is a triple paper filter. So we're going to filter out some more of those oils and some more of the sediment. So it's going to be a much cleaner cup of coffee. We're going to get a very similar flavor profile to the French press, but the flavors are going to be toned down. So it's not going to be nearly as intense as the French press is going to be, but we're going to get the same kind of levelness of coffee because we are filtering out the sediments and the oils, while on the pour over we're mainly filtering out the sediments, allowing some of those oils to pass through, and those oils is what gives it that bright citrusy notes. So as we taste the Chemex, we're definitely not getting that intense, bright floral flavor that we got with the pour over. A little overwhelming on the pour over. But with this, we're getting a lot more of those milk chocolate notes. We're getting a lot more of those bitters, but it's not intense. We're also getting those bright citrusy notes as well, but it's not like we're only tasting those bright citrusy notes like we are in the pour over. With the Chemex, we're kind of getting all the flavors hand in hand, where we're getting those bitter dark chocolate or the bitter milk chocolate notes at the very beginning, alongside with those orange blossom notes. And then because we're getting those bitter milk chocolate notes at the very beginning, it actually dies down that orange blossom flavor, so it doesn't taste as intense, but we're still getting those bright florally flavors. But what's nice is we're not being left with that dry mouth feeling like we were with pour over. Really good, much smoother. I really like the amount of milk chocolate flavors that we're getting from the Chemex versus the pour over, because with the pour over you don't really get to taste those milk chocolate notes until after the bright citrusy notes have washed away. And then even though the bright citrusy notes have washed away, that dry mouth feeling can distract you from those milk chocolate notes that you might be tasting, so they might go unnoticed for anyone who is not an avid coffee drinker. So the Chemex is really good, especially if you're looking for those milk chocolate notes. We're getting some really strong milk chocolate bitters. It makes for a really smooth cup of coffee. So now we're gonna try the French press. Sorry. So with the French press, it's a full immersion cup of coffee. It has the longest contact with the water versus grinds. It has the coarsest grind as well. So there's a little bit of a balance there. So there's not as much surface area for the water to make contact with the grinds. So there's not as much brewing happening in a shorter period of time. So that's why we have the full immersion and then the 4-minute brew time, is because the coarser grind accounts for the time and full immersion. But also with that, we're getting the full amount of sediments and the full amount of oils. So we're going to get a very full-bodied, flavorful cup of coffee. That is really smooth. The orange blossom notes definitely come out just a little bit more on the French press than they do on the Chemex, but we're still getting that intense milk chocolate flavor with the caramely sweetness. And that caramely sweetness actually comes out a little bit more in the French press, only because of the contrast in flavor notes. Because the Chemex is a little bit of a cleaner cup, the flavors aren't as intense as they are in the French press. When we get to that caramely sweetness as the palate starts to clear, as the palate starts to clear, that caramely sweetness in contrast to the bitter notes on the Chemex doesn't taste as sweet. But because the French press has that much more sediment and that much more oils, it's going to make it seem like a bitter cup of coffee in the very first sip. But then as the palate clears, it allows for that contrast to take place for that caramely sweetness. And as the palate starts to clear, that caramely sweetness actually tastes sweeter on the French press than it does on the Chemex, just because of those bold, intense flavors that we're initially getting from the very first sip. So that first sip versus the clear palate gives that caramely sweetness a very sweet flavor. It's very nice because it's not too sweet. It has a very subtle sweetness to it, and then we're primarily getting those bitter notes. So we're primarily getting those bitter milk chocolate notes with like almost more of a floral than a bright citrusy notes. With this particular brew method, we're not getting as much of that orange flavor. The floral notes are coming through though, so we're getting a lot of that blossom flavor, but that any kind of citrusy notes are kind of absent. So we're getting a lot of milk chocolate floral notes, and then washed away with that caramely sweetness. Really good. So if I had to choose a favorite out of these 3 brew methods for the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana, I would definitely choose the French press, just because we're getting those really intense bitter milk chocolate notes, which is what I look for in a cup of coffee. And then because of that contrast between bitter and then the cleansing of the palate, that caramely sweetness is much more predominant in the Chemex. And that is actually one of my favorite attributes to a good Latin American coffee, is a coffee that has strong milk chocolate notes, but then has a really clean, caramely sweetness, mouth cleansing mouthfeel. So with the French press, I really like it. If you are looking for a cleaner cup of coffee, much more tame, easier to drink. I would stick with the French or the Chemex. And then if you do like a little bit more of a floral, citrusy flair to your cup of coffee, the pour over is definitely a good choice as well, just because it gives it more of like a bright orange tea flavor versus a coffee, so you get more of those bright citrusy notes, which can be good if that's what you're looking for. And that's why it's important to explore the different brew methods, because we have a cup of coffee that has orange blossom, milk chocolate, and caramely sweetness. We brew it 3 different ways, and it has 3 complete different flavors depending on the brew method. So here we're catering over to someone who likes a bright citrusy floral cup of coffee. And then over here we have a more balanced cup of coffee, allowing those bitter milk chocolates to come forward, and then a more cleaner cup of coffee of the same flavor notes, just the flavors toned down, making it much easier to drink, and that caramely sweetness isn't as predominant. And so that's how the different brewing methods can affect the flavor of your coffee, and that's why we explore these different brewing methods on this channel, is because it's important to make sure that we explore all the different brewing methods so that we can learn about the different flavors that each coffee has to offer. Later, Iris. So now we're going to learn a little bit about Pedro Rodriguez and what he does to grow coffee. So he has spent the better of 3 decades learning and just educating himself about coffee. He started his first farm 30 years ago, and he sent his kids to agricultural school. And so what's really cool about this is he started his own initiative in 2014 called Sol de la Mañana, or the Morning Sun. And it's dedicated to agricultural knowledge and teaching the community, his community, all about agriculture and education. And so he has explored and spent the past 30 years just learning and developing and refining the coffee process. Now in this region, a lot of the farmers were deterred away from farming just because there was a lot of strife and a lot of things going on. So a lot of farmers didn't think that success was in reach. And so Pedro Rodriguez set out to refine and learn and develop his coffee growing. And he started inviting his community to join his initiative called the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana. And it's dedicated to teaching everyone how to better grow sustainable coffee and and to help give back to the environment and make for a strong economy. And that's what's important about this coffee, because coffee plays a vital role in the economy of different parts of the world, and then also helping them grow and learn about agriculture and helping them create a sustainable economy, and not just a sustainable economy, but a sustainable environment, not just for themselves, but for the wildlife in the area. And so we have a lot of different cool coffee practices where we're incorporating the wildlife and letting the wildlife kind of do a lot of the work for the farmers that just naturally happen in nature normally. So we're taking advantage of these different processes like bugs pruning, birds eating the bugs, and just natural things, so that we don't have to introduce pesticides and other things like that to lower the quality of our coffee. So we're able to get this high quality coffee through natural processes, so we can get all natural flavors and not really affect the environment in any negative way. And so what's cool about this is that in 2019, the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana initiative contained 50 different farms. And in 2 years, they have grown from 50 different farms to 100 farms. So in 2021, the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana has grown to 100 farms that are being helped and learning from this Bolivia Sol de la Mañana initiative. And then what's cool about that is that this initiative is extremely young. It started in 2014. So you have a very young initiative, someone who is very passionate about coffee and their culture and their community, and they want to give back and help make sure that everyone can have a sustainable livelihood, and then not just for the persons, but for nature as well. They're creating a sustainable nature and sustainable farms, and making sure that we can give back to the ground what we take. And so with that, we're creating a brighter future for Pedro Rodriguez's kids. They're learning a lot so that they can give to the future of farming. And then the best part about it is we can take these practices from the coffee farms that they're learning to work alongside nature, and we can start to introduce these practices among other agricultural practices so that we can help create a more sustainable environment for not just coffee growers, but other crops that have the opportunity to take that initiative and create a more sustainable crop. And so that's what's really cool about that. And then so with the initiative starting in 2014, it's a very young initiative. It's by 2019, it had gained 50 farmers in 5 years. And so we have 50 farms in 5 years, and then in just the last 2 years, it has doubled in growth. So the growth of the initiative is definitely there, and it's important to see that because it just shows how much that this Bolivia Sol de Mañana is impacting this region of the world, and how it's really helping a lot of the farms in that area create a more sustainable environment. And then another thing about the 100 farms that is a part of this initiative, it's important to remember that these farms aren't just single individuals that are part of these farms. These farms could represent up to hundreds of people for just a single farm. And so when you say, like, there's 100 farms that are part of this initiative, it's just not 100 people that's part of this initiative. If you have 100 people per farm, that could be 10,000 people that this initiative affects. So you have a lot of potential for these farms to impact the people of this area. And then as it grows, the reach of this initiative just gets even stronger. So as they start to take more farms into their initiative, start to teach more farmers about their growing practices, and then the farms start to teach their community about their growing practices, it just trickles on, and it's going to teach people around the world how to create a more sustainable economy and a more sustainable environment as well. And so just the beginning of this coffee is very important to helping people learn about agriculture and how nature and humans can work alongside to create a sustainable environment. So really cool. Awesome that Pedro Rodriguez is able to create the initiative of the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana and really go out there and help the people create a more sustainable environment and a sustainable economy, and helping people thrive in that part of the world. So it's really cool to learn the stories and really appreciate the cup of coffee that we have, because before the story, this was just a cup of coffee. And now that we know the story, it is a piece of history of agricultural science and how we can give back to the community and take knowledge that we've learned for ourselves and share that knowledge with the community so that the entire community can thrive and not just us. So give back to the community, help one another thrive, and enjoy a cup of coffee while we're doing it. Really, really good. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's coffee tasting and learning about how agricultural science can give back to the community and just creating a sustainable environment and a sustainable economy. And if you guys would like to know more about coffee, click the link down below. That's going to take you to a link of videos that I have done in the past. And the video above is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today's coffee tasting. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope your coffee was just as delicious as mine was.